You think you know yourself. You believe you're good. Moral, different from the people you read about in the news. But what if I told you that under the right conditions, you become someone you wouldn't recognize? What if the darkness isn't lurking in a few broken individuals, but woven into the fabric of what it means to be human? It's 1971, Stanford University. A group of young men, all psychologically screened, all deemed stable and normal, walk into a basement. Half of them are given uniforms and nightsticks. The other half are stripped, deloused, and given numbers. Within 36 hours, the guard are inventing cruelties that weren't part of the experiment. Within 6 days, the whole thing has to be shut down. The question everyone asked afterward was simple. How did normal people become monsters so quickly? But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Perhaps the real question is, were they ever normal to begin with? Or were we just never looking closely enough? There's a story we tell ourselves about human nature. It goes like this: most people are good. Evil is an aberration. The Nazis, the cult leaders, the serial killers, they're outliers. Broken minds, bad wiring. We build this narrative because it protects us. It lets us sleep at night. It allows us to believe that we're fundamentally different from them. But the science tells a different story. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. In 1961, a psychologist named Stanley Milgram placed an advertisement in a New Haven newspaper. He was looking for volunteers for a study on memory and learning. What he was actually studying was something far darker: obedience. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. Participants were told they'd be teachers, administering electric shocks to a learner every time they got an answer wrong. The shock started at 15 volts and increased in 15-volt increments, all the way up to 450 volts. Labeled on the shock generator were warnings: danger, severe shock. The final 2 switches were simply marked XXX. The learner, of course, was an actor. No real shocks were administered, but the participants didn't know that. And as the voltage increased, the actor began to protest. First with grunts, then with demands to be let out, then with screams, then with an ominous silence that suggested unconsciousness or worse. Standing beside each participant was the experimenter, a man in a gray lab coat, calm and authoritative. And whenever a participant hesitated, whenever their conscience seemed to flicker, the experimenter would offer a simple prompt: please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. Before conducting the study, Milgram asked psychiatrists, college students, and middle class adults to predict how many people would go all the way to 450 volts. The estimates range from 0 to 3%. Surely, people reasoned, anyone with a shred of decency would refuse. They were catastrophically wrong. 65% of participants administered the maximum shock. 65%. These weren't sadists. They were ordinary people. Teachers, salesmen, engineers. People who would describe themselves as moral. People who, if you asked them, in the abstract, whether they'd torture a stranger, would say absolutely not. But here's what makes it truly unsettling. Many of them didn't even seem conflicted. Yes, they showed signs of stress. Sweating, trembling, nervous laughter. But they continued. Because a man in a lab coat told them to. Because the situation had a veneer of legitimacy. Because stepping outside the role they'd been assigned felt more uncomfortable than administering what they believed were potentially lethal shocks to another human being. Milgram's work revealed something profound about the architecture of human morality. We like to think our ethics are internal, that we have a moral compass that guides us regardless of circumstance. But the research suggests otherwise. Morality, for most people, is context-dependent. It's not a fixed feature of who we are, but a negotiation between our internal values and external pressures. And under the right conditions, the external pressures win. Not sometimes, most of the time. This pattern repeats throughout the psychological literature. In the 1970s, researchers John Darley and Daniel Batson conducted what's now known as the Good Samaritan study. They took seminary students, people literally training to be moral leaders, and told them they needed to go to another building to give a talk. Some were told they were late and needed to hurry. Others were told they had plenty of time. On the way, each student passed a man slumped in an alley, coughing and clearly in distress. This was again a setup. The man was a plant. The question was, who would stop to help? The topic of the talk they were about to give made no difference. Even students who were literally about to give a sermon on the parable of the Good Samaritan walked right past a person in need. The only variable that mattered was time. If they were in a hurry, only 10% stopped. If they had time, 63% stopped. Think about that. These were people who had dedicated their lives to religious study and service. And a simple time constraint was enough to override their foundational values. Most of them stepped over a suffering human being because they didn't want to be late. What this tells us is deeply uncomfortable. Our behavior is shockingly malleable. We're not the autonomous moral agents we imagine ourselves to be. We're responsive, reactive, shaped by invisible situational forces that we barely acknowledge, let alone understand. The person you are when you're relaxed and unhurried is not the same. The person you are when you're stressed or tired or being watched, or following orders, or part of a group. And groups are where things get truly dark. There's a phenomenon in social psychology called de-individuation. It's the process by which people lose their sense of individual identity and personal responsibility. When they're part of a collective, you see in mobs, in riots, in online comment sections. When people feel anonymous, when they're subsumed into a group identity, the normal constraints on behavior dissolve. Things that would be unthinkable alone become not just possible, but easy. In 1967, a researcher named Philip Zimbardo conducted a field experiment in the Bronx. He left 2 cars abandoned on the street. One had no license plates, and its hood up. The other was left intact. Within 10 minutes, the damaged car was being stripped. People were taking parts, vandalizing it, destroying it. Middle-class families participated. A father with his young son took a radiator. The intact car sat untouched for a week. Then Zimbardo took a sledgehammer and smashed part of it himself. Within hours, it too was destroyed. The message was clear. Once the social norm is broken, once the signal is sent that rules don't apply here, people will act in ways they never would otherwise. This is the same mechanism at work in genocides, in corporate fraud, in police brutality. The individual doesn't wake up one day and decide to become a monster. They're placed in an environment where the moral guardrails are systematically removed, where authority figures condone or encourage harm, where peers are doing the same thing, normalizing it, where victims are dehumanized, turned into abstractions or statistics rather than people. And step by step, action by action, ordinary people commit extraordinary evil. The psychologist Albert Bandura spent decades studying what he called moral disengagement. These are the psychological mechanisms we use to do harm without feeling like bad people. We use euphemistic language, collateral damage instead of dead civilians, enhanced interrogation instead of torture. We displace responsibility, telling ourselves we were just following orders. We diffuse responsibility across a group, so no single person feels accountable. We dehumanize the victims, making them less than human in our minds. We compare our actions to worse actions, telling ourselves at least we're not as bad as them. These mechanisms aren't esoteric. You use them. I use them. Every single day, when we ignore a homeless person on the street, we've dehumanized them. When we justify buying products made with exploitative labor because everyone else does it too, we've diffused responsibility. When we consume factory farm meat and avoid thinking about the reality of how it's produced. We've used euphemism and willful ignorance. We're not evil for doing these things. We're human. And being human means being capable of extraordinary rationalization. We interpret information in ways that protect our self-image. When we do something good, we attribute it to our character. When we do something bad, we blame the situation. I helped that person because I'm generous. I snapped at my partner because I was stressed. This bias is so powerful that it operates even when we're aware of it. Even now, as you're hearing this, part of your brain is probably thinking yes. Other people do this, but I'm more self-aware. And that might be the most dangerous illusion of all. The belief that awareness equals immunity. That because you've read about these biases, because you consider yourself thoughtful and introspective, you're somehow exempt. You're not. The research is unequivocal on this point. Knowing about a bias doesn't make you less susceptible to it. Intelligent people, educated people, people who study psychology for a living, they all fall prey to the same patterns. In some cases, intelligence makes it worse because it gives you more tools to rationalize, to construct elaborate justifications for what you were going to do anyway. Consider the phenomenon of ethical fading. This is when the ethical dimensions of a decision fade from our awareness, allowing us to act in self-interested ways without feeling like we're compromising our values. It happens in business constantly. A manager doesn't say, "Should we lie to customers?" They say, "How can we frame this to maximize sales?" The ethical question is reframed as a strategic question, and suddenly the moral weight evaporates. It happens in relationships. We don't ask ourselves, "Am I being cruel?" We ask, "How do I win this argument?" The goal eclipses the means, and we become capable of things we'd condemn in others. What makes this particularly insidious is that we're incredibly skilled at maintaining a positive self-image while behaving badly. Psychologists call this moral licensing. When you do something good, you subconsciously give yourself permission to do something bad. Donate it to charity? Now you're less likely to help someone in person. Choose the eco-friendly product? Now you're more likely to indulge in other wasteful behaviors. Our brains are constantly running this moral accounting system, balancing our self-image rather than actually being consistent. And then there's the spotlight effect. We vastly overestimate how much other people notice us. This sounds benign, maybe even narcissistic, but it has dark implications because it means we're far more concerned with appearing moral than being moral. We'll make the ethical choice when we think people are watching, and abandon it when we think we're alone. In one study, people were more likely to cheat when wearing sunglasses. Indoors, sunglasses, a trivial change in their sense of being observed was enough to shift their behavior. What all of this research points to is a fundamental truth about human nature that we desperately don't want to face. We are not the heroes of our own stories. We're not even reliable narrators. We're post hoc rationalizers, constantly rewriting the past to make ourselves look better, to make our actions seem justified, to maintain the fiction that we're good people in a world of moral clarity. But the world isn't morally clear, and we're not good in any stable, enduring sense. We're contextual, fragile, frighteningly easy to corrupt. This doesn't mean we're doomed. It doesn't mean morality is impossible or that trying to be good is pointless. But it does mean we need to radically revise our understanding of what being good actually requires. It's not about having the right values or the right beliefs everyone thinks they have. It's about recognizing that your values and beliefs will bend under pressure. It's about building systems and structures that make ethical behavior easier and unethical behavior harder. It's about humility in the face of your own capacity for self-deception. The people who do the worst things in history don't think of themselves as villains. They think they're justified. They think they're the heroes. The Nazis believed they were saving civilization. The slave owners believed they were maintaining natural order. The torturers believe they're protecting society. And if you think you're fundamentally different from them, if you think you could never be shaped by similar forces, then you're exactly the kind of person who could be. Because the truly dangerous people aren't the ones who know they're doing wrong. They're the ones who are absolutely certain they're doing right. The darkness isn't something that happens to other people. It's not an external force that invades the weak-minded. It's woven into the operating system of being human. Every one of us carries the capacity for cruelty, for rationalization, for moral compromise. The difference between us and the people we condemn isn't that we're better. It's that we haven't been tested in the same ways. Yet, if this exploration into the hidden mechanisms of human behavior unsettled you good, that discomfort is the beginning of awareness. Subscribe to this channel for more investigations into the psychology we'd rather not acknowledge. And leave a comment. What's one time you realize you weren't who you thought you were? Let's be honest with ourselves, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the alternative is far more dangerous.